any bearing on the argument you're making.
We're already going. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I think that's a good thing. You and I will just get going on it. You had said earlier, like, we can just shoot the shit while you're driving for 4 hours straight. And we're like, yeah, we got plenty of time. I'll turn off the NDI so that people can at least see the thing. So we get going. Oh, Jesus, we're two peas in a pod on that one. Welcome, everyone, to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter. With me today is 𝐂𝐴𝐵𝐺. 𝐂𝐴𝐵𝐺, how are you?
I am ranting. That's how I am.
Yeah. We're both. Well, we've been discussing some triggering topics, which and we're trying to figure out which ones we're going to want to talk about. Like, well, we could just shoot the shit. So we had a guest we were hoping to do today. Guest could not make it. So we'll be rebooking them and we'll be getting all that sorted out. But for now, we are just 𝐂𝐴𝐵𝐺 and I on our own. Now, there's a lot going on our Discord, and there's some really interesting topics. There was a guy who was a anti-vaxxer. He was, I think he was a preacher. I should go check it out again. So I actually brought that story up, and I was doing research for the show. And we have a lot of this stuff, a lot of interesting stuff on the Discord. So there was that one. He was a anti-vaxxer who has now just died of COVID. And he had said that Jesus was his vaccine. And we've discussed it always puts you in a bit of an awkward position. There's a little schadenfreude, and like, it's like, well, hey, that's kind of what you got. But on the flip side, I'd rather nobody get sick from COVID, and I'd rather people kind of help with that goal. And 𝐂𝐴𝐵𝐺 and I were talking about some pretty important shit, and then he made fun of my chair and the noises that it makes, which I really didn't appreciate, and then we went live. So thank you all for joining us. And then I know, 𝐂𝐴𝐵𝐺, you wanted to talk about, but there's just so much. And then the other biggie, which is the one that we were talking about, was Chappelle. And Dave Chappelle, which I did not want to do a deep dive into, and ended up getting sucked into a deep dive. I'm going to murder Mowdy for that one. So I don't know. How you doing? What are you thinking about? And I can't see the live chat right now. I'll have that up in a minute, but just so everyone knows, can't see the live chat right now. So what are you thinking about? What's going on in your mind right now?
Well, until I called you, I was thinking about all the snow that's on the ground around me and thinking that it's too early to be winter and I don't want to deal with snow yet. Here I am dealing with snow. Then you had to call, take my mind entirely away from driving across the country and into one topic that, especially that I get so ranty about, which is how quick people will take something that either out of context, not pay attention to actually what they're talking about, or not even accept that opinions can be nuanced and that you can be supportive of people while not necessarily agreeing with everything they say, and then labeling them as such a bad person and that a person that needs to be attacked, which is completely counterproductive to getting anywhere in any kind of conversation, especially when you have a large enough group of people, who happen to agree with that, that kind of that position or opinion or whatever it is. And discourse is just getting so vitriolic about, now you're just, even if let's just say that your opinion isn't the best opinion. Let's say you're not fully informed of all of the stuff and therefore your opinion is not up to date and or whatever. Or maybe even you're a little willfully ignorant about something. That doesn't necessarily make them a horrible, horrible person that deserves to be ostracized or to have people go try and get them fired or get their lives ruined. It's completely counterproductive, and all it does is drive even more division, more animosity, and I don't find it very useful. So it annoys me when people start going after other people as though they were literal Nazis gassing people in their backyard. It's like, if you've actually got good evidence that somebody's doing that, then yeah, we should probably go destroy their lives. Yeah. But if they're just simply stating an opinion, and even if it's a wrong opinion, maybe let's try and change their mind instead of just calling them a horrible person. Because even if they are a horrible person, if they're actually making an argument, and not just stating an opinion, there's difference between those two. But if they're actually making an argument for an opinion, the argument stands or falls on its own merit, regardless of who's making it. Even if they're the worst, most terrible person in the world, if they make a good, sound, logical argument, then the argument is good, sound, and logical.
Yep.
Them being evil wouldn't change that. Opinions are a little bit different. The saying, opinions are like assholes, everyone has one. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them are justified, some of them may not be justified. And you can discuss opinions, but it's generally speaking, opinions are on things that you can't necessarily prove. I think this is good, or I think this is bad.
Well,
and it depends upon your point of view.
I mean, there are many ways in which I think we see a lot of this, and I really don't want to sit there and make one of those back in my day arguments, because I wasn't paying this kind of attention back in my day. But part of it has to be social media and the way it accelerates discourse and people rising to anger and sort of pigeonholing people. But I can think of there are many things I support. One of the ones that I think people are most clear on my supporting is anti-theism. Not just atheism, anti-theism. I'm not fanatical about it, but it's also in part because I'm not fanatical about it that my, quote, brothers and sisters who are anti-theistic can turn me off really easily if I see them bullying people. And I thought you were against organized religion. I am. I'm not against people. I'm not against the people who hold these ideas, and in many cases, they're at least as much a victim as anybody else is. And if somebody doesn't want to deconvert, A, I'm not sure that it's a good idea to force them. I think, B, if you do, you're probably no better than them for trying to force convert people and telling people they're going to hell. And C, you're not going to succeed in actually changing people's minds. So let's talk about the ideas based on their merits, because I happen to think mine are actually better than theirs. And if mine are, over a long enough period of time, I should win. And if not me, then somebody else. Even, it's as Martin Luther King Jr. had said, it's the long, slow arc of history. Right ideas have a tendency to win over time. It's the overtime part that sucks, and we think it should be tomorrow. But and then the other thing is I take a look at...
Well, and I think...
Yeah, please.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were going to pause. But it's like the other thing is like, it's like, well, the right ideas tend to win out in time. And sometimes the reason for that is because we've tried all of the bad options and found that they were bad. So it's like, well, this is all we really got left, and so we'll try that. And, oh, wow, look at that, it works. I know they said that it would work 100 years ago, but it took us 100 years to try all of these other options that were less good and to find out that they were less good.
Yeah. And I think here's the problem. Whenever I'm looking at, and I make no bones about this, and in fact, I guess we're going to have a discussion about this on another channel at some point coming up soon. I'd rather be a theist. I probably was happier as a theist. I just have this problem where I think the greater the amount of truth that we have around us, the better it is for everybody. So what I would like to be true obviously has no impact. It's what is true, and denying reality really can maybe lead to a happier person, but it doesn't lead to more truth, and it leads to more destruction to at least other people. So I try not to do it. But that also means when I'm listening to arguments, and I've made this argument to a couple of theists, hey, listen, you're trying to convert somebody who would like to be converted. But I also double check all my work, because I say to myself, I want this to be true, so I have to double check my work, because biases are going to sneak in a bit better, and I have to make sure. And I don't double check my work by, doing anything other than just double checking for biases and double checking for areas where I've screwed up, and I always find one. So it's not going out and trying to invent them and put them there. It's, unfortunately, they tend to be there. But, that also means, I think for everybody who's got something that they're passionate about that affects their lives, they're going to, Mowdy's take on Chappelle. Since Porpoise has started talking about that, so I want to kill Mowdy for that one. Mowdy really, that was not an easy show, but we'll get into that. Anyways, the long story short, it's gratifying to fucking call people who clearly appear to be influenced by race racist. And it's gratifying to call people who don't necessarily hold your values of what America should be, to call them unpatriotic. And I've spoken with members of the KKK, and I've got to tell you, I've never once even considered calling them racist, because although they are in my book, they aren't in theirs, and that's going to end the conversation. And I'd rather keep the conversation going if I can. And this gets back to Daryl Davis. And I wanted to put up some videos of Daryl Davis for this show, and I have them archived. I was unable to get them before we could start. But Daryl Davis was a black musician who decided he wanted to understand the KKK better. And he befriended a grand wizard of the KKK. And after, I think it was 2 years of going to Klan rallies with him, going to Klan rallies with the grand wizard, eventually the grand wizard actually saw him as a human being and realized he was wrong and said, you know what, here, handed his robe to Daryl Davis. And Daryl Davis continued to make friends with the KKK community. And one by one, he now has collected, at least 200 people have left the KKK as a direct result of Daryl Davis. He's got dozens of robes where they just surrender them to him. And I'm sitting there going, okay, we've all wanted to yell at the KKK when they're protesting and call them racists, Nazis, and all these other things. How much has that ever actually helped? And here's Daryl Davis, a black man, going to the fucking KKK rallies, who's actually done something. That's remarkable, and I'm more impressed by that. And then I guess there's one other thing I want to say, but it'll go into another topic, so I'll hold on to it. I figure you've got something, and I'll catch up with the live chat. Oh, you there?
Oh, I thought you had one more. I thought you had one more thing that you were going to say.
There was. Well, actually, okay. I'll say it then now, which was, and this is so. Yeah, Porpoise knows 𝐬𝐬's take on this thing, and 𝐬𝐬. There's one thing I hate, and that's being predictable. And 𝐬𝐬 just totally played me. He totally fucking played me. But I'll get into that in a second. I'm interested to know that. Yeah, I saw it. Well, we'll talk about that in a sec. I guess that's where we're going. But I was, and this has been controversial, and I've gotten in a little trouble for this. My hope is people understand, again, if it's wrong, then it's wrong. But I was thrilled when, oh my God, biologist, one of the four horsemen of atheism.
Brett Weinstein?
Shit. Asshole.
Oh, biologist.
Yes. You fucking Jesus. Okay, thank you for that. Oh my God. One of the four horsemen of atheism, he's Dawkins. When Dawkins said something along the lines of feelings aren't reality or something like that, I was fucking thrilled. I was thrilled because I wouldn't have thought he'd feel that way. And he was about to get this humanitarian award. He hadn't accepted it yet, but he had won it. And I thought he deserved it because, of who and what I thought he was. And I was wrong. I was wrong he deserved it. I was wrong as to who he was. But thank God he said it. Because you're not going to change it if he doesn't say it. And the fact that he can, and I get this too, and this is a common thing, which is where people, well, it's just a feeling. Yeah, and evolution is just a theory. Words mean different things in different contexts. And the reason people say dysphoria is a feeling is because we don't have the language yet. It's still new enough that we're even recognizing this condition. We don't have a language. It's not a feeling. A feeling, anger, hate, these are feelings, okay? They're transient. They can be very powerful. They don't change your life. They don't affect who you are. They're feelings. Dysphoria is something very, very different. So he's right. He was right about what he said about feelings. But what he was trying to say was about dysphoria, and it's like, I know people say it's a feeling. It's not. They also say it's a self-identity. It ain't that either, because a self-identity is ostensibly something you can choose. We just don't have the language. This is just who you are. I can't even really begin to imagine what it would be like to be in the wrong skin, in the wrong body. But I've got some idea, at least like I can empathize and say, I felt that way probably if I did the right drugs at the right time. I felt that way for a short period of time. Imagine living with it. So he doesn't get it. Is he a humanitarian? in any meaningful sense? No, because he hasn't connected with that, and he would need to connect with that. But we wouldn't know that if he hadn't have said it. So I'm sitting there going, I don't know if taking the award from him is right. He certainly doesn't deserve it. But what is certainly right is saying, let's have a chat about everything that you just said so we can straighten some things out. And if he's the reasonable person that we all hope he is, that we all think he is, you can get to him. And if you can, then you've got another advocate for trans rights. But the only way that happens is if instead of meeting that with hostility, we say, thank you. Thank you for... I hate Al Sharpton. I fucking loathe Al Sharpton. But the one thing he did right was when Don Imus said some terrible shit. I forget what it was. Al Sharpton was like, you know what? I ain't going to fight you with this. Let's you and I have a talk on the radio. I'm not going to call you any names. You're not going to call. We're just going to talk. And he just walked in and said, I forgive you anything you've ever done wrong when it comes to race, at least in terms of for how it affects me, and let's just talk. And I was just like, I personally think that's how it's done. I don't think that's easy. If it were easy, everybody would do it and would have solved these problems. Anyways, that's my view on Dawkins. What were you going to say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was reading I was right in the middle of reading the chat too, and that was an abrupt. What do you think? I think that I'm thinking that maybe I should change the color of my background so I can read this. Anyway, no, I mean, like there's TED Talks. I believe the guy that you're talking about with KKK, I believe he gave a TED Talk about it. And I remember seeing somebody's, if it wasn't that specific person, it was another person who did the same thing. And then, you know, like there's another TED Talk. I love watching TED Talks because you come up with some very fascinating information and insights into things. And it gives you an avenue, because TED Talks usually aren't super long. It's like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder, you know, because you always have to accept the fact that the people could be biased and just be talking out their ass about a topic. So when they come on, it's like, well, that's really interesting, or that's something counter to what I had thought. And so it'll send me off on entire tangents of trying to find out, is this real, or, you know, or how widespread is this? Find out more information. And there was a lady I actually watched. She was a very, very left-wing radical. I hate to say left-wing. She was a radical feminist and kind of hated men. And that was by her own admission, and kind of viewed men as kind of just pigs and not really redeemable. And until she actually decided that she was going to go see what the men's rights movement was actually about. And so she started going to men's rights meetings, going to men's rights movements, and trying to learn what is it that the men's right activists are actually saying. And it completely blew her mind away.
Yep.
And, you know, and she's now how radical feminists became a men's rights advocate. You know, she's like, and I am a men's rights advocate because, you know, the things that they brought up and the things that they're talking about are absolutely true. They've been proven to be true. And even without the scientific data, when you lay out the argument, even without the supporting studies and things behind it, almost everybody still automatically says, yeah, that sounds about right. And they don't realize how much of a problem some of those things actually are. They're just like, yeah, because it's been that way for quite a while.
Well, and that's one of the things that she had said too. That please, sorry.
Well, no, I mean, so it's like, you know, you attack somebody for a position that they hold or an idea they hold, even if you think that position or that opinion or whatever is a reprehensible opinion. Attacking them isn't going to solve the problem, because as soon as you attack somebody, you know, they instantly become defensive, and they're not very receptive to listening to a damn thing you have to say. You know, so I've seen time and time again that the best effect to sway people's opinions is to truly listen to them and try and understand what it is they're saying, and to recognize that oftentimes when they're talking about especially controversial and difficult topics where we don't have easy answers, you know, that opinions can be incredibly nuanced, just like problems can be. You know, and that it's really, really important that we get what's actually true if we want to actually solve problems. I mean, you can, you know, if you want to make believe, you know, you've got your ideology and this is the way the world is, whether it's actually reflected in reality or not, but this is the way you see the world, and you say these are the problems that we need to solve. I mean, it is possible you could solve those problems without having, the real facts of the situation, but it's a lot less likely. Like, if we want to actually solve a lot of the problems, we need to know what the actual evidence, what actually happens in reality. We need to know what that is. And even if it's an uncomfortable thing, like when you say people want to talk about gender equality amongst the different positions, like getting more women into STEM or getting more women into technology. And when you look at like the Scandinavian countries and you say, okay, well, they've done the most of any countries in the world to be as egalitarian as possible. And we see the occupation, the gender occupations, what genders go into which occupations, has become more divisive, not more inclusive. When people are more able to choose, they tend to choose very different things, which is not what was expected. And I've still talked about people who completely deny that actually happens. And it's like, wait a minute, we've observed this, we see it happen. And it's like, if that theory held sway, you would think that there would at least be a trending towards a more inclusive workforce that would more represent, like going into the medical field, you'd find 50% roughly men, 50% women, and you don't see that. I mean, even in the United States, you don't see that.
Well, it's leaning
so
women,
we have
isn't
to recognize,
it? It's actually leaning significantly women, I think, in the U.S. right now. In medical school,
yes, women.
It's women by a huge margin, like 4-1, if I recall.
The new doctors, new doctors that are coming out of medical school are overwhelmingly women. The medical profession itself is overwhelmingly women worldwide, or at least in the developed countries, I should say. It's probably not true in some of the remote places in Africa or the middle of Asia, but in more or less the Western world, the medical field is dominated by women. And when you give people more choice to pursue what interests them, you find out how different they are and the different choices that they make. So, we have to at least recognize that this is something that happens, and denying that it actually happens when it's really happening right there. It's not like the psychology field is full of a bunch of right-wing conspiracy nuts. I think I can think of one right-wing psychologist, and I can only think of one. But so it's not like it's a right-wing conspiracy that's causing this. I mean, it's most overwhelmingly left-leaning people in the psychology field. They're the ones that found this. So it's just that you need to find what actually happens in reality, and sometimes that's uncomfortable. What happens, even if it's not even a bad thing. Doesn't I mean, the women would predominantly choose to go into fields that deal more with people rather than objects, and men tend to go into fields that deal with objects more than people. Why is that a bad thing? I mean, we've put this label on it, like, it's, inclusivity is the good thing. And if we don't have that inclusivity, we don't have that, then it's automatically a bad thing. It might be. I'm not saying it's not in every case. Like if a company is entirely white and they're headquartered in, say, Philadelphia, which has a very, very high black population, that indeed might be a bad thing. You need to look and see why this is happening. But it's not automatically a bad thing. You need to find out why it's happening. And I see more and more. You need to
understand the cause. Yeah,
more and more moving forward, we're losing the ability to look deeper and to really, take a nuanced approach or, analysis of things, multivariable analysis of things. We tend to oversimplify it and then say, well, it's bad. And that's like, but it might not be.
Well,
it might be. Well, you don't know that because you haven't done a multivariable analysis to find out exactly what's going on here.
Well, I'd like to bring up two or three things that have been brought up in the live chat, which I think just kind of dovetail with this nicely. First of all, Sinister Porpoise, $2, Sinister. Thank you once again so much. We really appreciate your support. Women belong in the server room. I couldn't agree more. And it's actually interesting. When I started teaching computer science, I found more female teachers of computer science in high school than than male. By in fact, I was the only male in the department. But absolutely couldn't agree more. And then Maya said something that I thought was interesting. A true feminist will fight for men's rights. And then Sinister asked earlier, what do we mean by the men's rights movement? Do we mean how it started, or do we mean what it is online? And I will confess, I've only really encountered two people who self-identified as being part of the men's movement, and I really had a strong dislike of both of them. And their views, which, while I thought the sort of very basics of them were built in reality, their views struck me as the very thing that I'm talking about, sort of protesting, where you turn it into this extremist me, and it's sort of like, no, I detest the notion that cis white male can't have things going wrong for them, but I also think it's a little hard to deny the reality that in terms of where things have stood for a very long time, things are skewed far in their favor. So, but what that woman had said that I really liked, because I know the video you're talking about, and I've forgotten her name, but she said that when she was interviewing the men's movement, the people in the men's movement, she kept hearing all these things that they weren't actually saying. But it was because she had all of these assumptions about who and what they were. They said one of the ones that she heard the most was that they were saying that their complaints were more important than hers. And even some of them said, listen, we have to solve inequality towards women. We just have to realize that there's also inequality towards men. So if we can work on some of those too, and also try not to heap more onto them, and always recognizing that right now it's still far easier to be a man in our society than a woman, but that doesn't mean there aren't issues. And it's not binary. It's not all or one. And the fact that, as she said, the way she had always understood it was they're saying, well, men have problems too, ergo women's problems don't matter, or we shouldn't address women's problems. She said, even when they said, no, in fact, the women's problems are kind of bigger, so they kind of have to take some priority. We're just saying don't ignore the fact that men have them too, and that there is, in fact, some inequalities towards men. And so that's what had moved her, and I think Maya had said a true feminist will fight for men's rights, and I think that's absolutely true. For me, that was a difficult issue in particular. My mother had some profound mental health issues. My father left her when he was 4 and always wanted us and made it very clear he was going to try to take us, but this was the 80s. Men never got the kids, even when there were documented psychiatric issues of the mother, because it was assumed no man could love his children as much as the mother would, which we know is not true. Boy, do we know it's not true. And, we've seen women murder their own children and all these other things. But at the time it was assumed that, and it's much better. It's not, fixed, but certainly my life suffered as a result of a very faulty assumption. He was never going to get the kids. So, there was and then there was one other thing I wanted to bring up, but again, let's go to you again and see if you had anything to add.
Well, no, and going through reading on the live chat, and it's like, no, I'm not forgetting about unconscious bias, though I'm not entirely sure how you prove unconscious bias, because by very definition, it's unconscious. And the testing methods that at least I've seen people use to justify unconscious bias don't seem to, really hold up under testing. Maybe I'm missing some. I haven't looked into it for a while. But the point I'm trying to say is that there aren't, I'm not saying that there aren't issues that are still driving people in certain directions. What I'm saying is that in the societies that have done the most to be as egalitarian as they possibly can, we see men and women, especially men and women, starting to differentiate more. They make different decisions. They don't, they're not becoming more the same or more interchangeable. They're actually becoming more different. And
self-selecting, or selecting their own, selecting themselves, but still
we
based
see that
on,
trend.
Yeah.
Right. We see those trends moving, into when they have the option to select what it is that actually interests them, to pursue what interests them. They tend to choose different things, and there's obviously lots of differences. One of the statistics I saw was on a personality trait, aggressiveness. If you take the human population as a whole and you just take a random man and a random woman out of the population and ask them, hey, which one do you think is more aggressive? And if you chose the man, you would be right about 60% of the time. And if you chose the woman, you'd be right about 40% of the time. That's a hell of a lot of overlap. I mean, there's a lot of very aggressive women out, and there's a lot of very timid men. We're more the same than we are different. From the research that I've seen done or read I've listened to the interviews with psychologists that study these things. And they're like, yeah, we are generally more the same than we are different. Of course, when you push out to the extremes, you start seeing some pretty extreme differences in who is in those extremes. Like if you push out to the very extreme of aggressiveness, it's all men. There are no women at the very extreme high-end aggressiveness. So they can be big differences at the extremes, but in the middle, kind of the average, we're all fairly similar. And I'm not saying that there aren't other issues that are driving people into certain career paths, but you would not think that the differences would become greater as a society becomes more egalitarian, if the driving factor in why men choose certain career paths versus women choosing certain career paths, you wouldn't think that the divide would get bigger as you started to eliminate some of those pressures. Certainly they probably haven't gotten all of them, but we can see where the trend's going.
I'm trying to remember, there was a statistic on, I forget whether it was psychopaths or other of the, what is that? I want to say that's type B personality disorders, but psychopaths and or just murderers, killers, and of course we've found females who do that, but by like 1/10 of males. So I think there's at the high ends there are definitely some differences. So what got me thinking about this, and what got us sort of talking about this, and we've talked about the Dawkins thing, and we've talked a lot on the show about cancel culture, and that's something that has troubled me for a while. That's why we talked about the Evergreen State incident and areas where the regressive left have caused some, in my view, serious problems. But so what ended up, I was prepping for tonight's show, and we knew we weren't going to have a guest, so I was going over the Discord and all the things that were in it and that we could talk about, and I gotten a pretty good list of things I was interested in discussing. I think you had brought up Biden's numbers and how and why he's having issues with that, and then I get a call from a former friend, 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥-𝐈𝐧, who I was going to maybe leave that, but 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥 calls me up and says, "Have you heard about this Chappelle video?" Now, I had, but what I had, and I knew that according to what I had heard, Chappelle had said some pretty egregious things. What caught my attention was at least one of the 3 Netflix employees have been suspended. Now, the reason they were suspended, at least on paper, and this at least is true that this did happen, they don't contest this, which was there was a meeting of higher ups. It was ostensibly like a regular monthly meeting, but it was going to be discussing some of the blowback from Chappelle and his comedy special, and these 3 employees were not invited to the meeting. They had obtained the link and entered the meeting and were listening, regardless of the fact that it was not a meeting for their level at the organization. So they were suspended for doing that. They had all 3 of them tweeted some pretty hostile tweets about Chappelle and what he had said. And so they said, "We have been suspended for our tweets." Netflix replied, "Nope, you are free to. In fact, we encourage dissent, but you don't get to come to these meetings that you're not invited to, especially if you don't notify the person running the meeting." But one of them had tweeted something along the lines of, there aren't 2 issues, there aren't 2 sides to this. There's people who want to live and people who want to murder trans people. And she was discussing specifically Chappelle's comedy show. And these kind of statements usually trigger me because they are an attempt to end dialogue and to just take, we're not going to have a reasonable discussion at that point. It reminds me of the whole Essence of Thought debacle, which I don't know if we want to readdress here, but In Time has ever publicly denounced. We don't publicly denounce people. We don't. What happened with Essence of Thought was so egregious to the community that In Time actually, as an organization, denounced Essence of Thought. And it was a horrific incident that we don't really need to get into right now. But and part of it was this kind of hyperbole that, well, you know, somebody who hasn't done all the research and reached all the conclusions I think they should reach is guilty of, I think in this case it was crimes against humanity, for saying something along the lines of there needs to be more research to trans women in sports. You can sit there and say, no, there doesn't, but it's not crimes against humanity in my view, and it led to some pretty terrible real-life consequences. And I think that's where that kind of hyperbole does. And anyone who starts the conversation with either you're for, you know, people who want to live or you're for murdering trans people, that's a non-starter. That's not, you can't, no, I'm sorry. That's not someone who has an interest in genuine dialogue. You had put it well. What was it you had said right before? Or I think you were still talking about it when we started.
There's there's not just two positions. That's an untrue statement. Well, crap. We were talking for like 10 minutes. I said a whole bunch of crap. You really should have had the recorder going so you could get me.
Yeah, I should have. Yeah, well, the problem is all the
I remember.
Shit you say.
I remember that going. Yeah. Well, yeah. You don't listen to what I say anyway, so.
Well, I stopped listening because it tends to make sense. I was like, shit. There's nothing I can use against you. You know, it's like, hey, listen, I would record everything you say and just plaster
it. If it was, well, yeah, I mean, because it was like I remember watching a lot of those videos between, God, I'm not gonna remember. I remember British long-haired dude. Why can't I remember his name?
Rationality rules.
Yes.
Robert Woodruff.
An
Essence of Thought.
Yeah, Woodruff. Yeah, so they were going back and forth. And I watched several of those videos, and there were several times where I wanted to reach through and smack Essence of Thought because, you know, it's like, well, even if we accept the notion that participating in sports is a human right, I'm not entirely convinced of that, but let's give it that. Participating in private clubs of sports isn't a human right. You know, you don't have the right to participate in any club that you want to. You know, they're exclusionary, and we're generally okay with most of the exclusions that they make. You know, so and then to say that you're guilty of, you know, the blood's on your hands because you don't agree with this, you know, none of that is productive, and it creates a binary stance that's just simply not true. You know, it's like you can be for people being allowed to be who they are and being treated with dignity and respect, and not believe that they should be able to participate in any sport that they wish. I mean, you can have those two opinions at the same time.
Well, and
it doesn't necessarily make you a bad person either.
And to get back to Stephen Woodruff, thank you. To get back to Davis. I don't know how Davis told his family. He's got a wife, his mother, if I recall. How do you tell your family as a black man that you're going to attend a KKK rally as the guest of honor by the Grand Wizard? But he appears to have genuinely tried to make friends with this person. And one of the things that he had to do was he had to say, I'm going to try to see past the fact that this man hates me for the color of my skin and try to find the humanity in him. And it was doing that allowed the Grand Wizard to find the humanity in Daryl Davis. And it's an extraordinarily brave act, I think, emotionally, physically. I wouldn't want to be at a KKK. I'm a white guy. I don't want to be at a KKK rally. And I'm aware that expecting that everyone do this is unrealistic. But I also think that if you truly are for advancing the rights of whatever your cause is, humiliating the other side using just overwhelming hyperbole it's to try to embarrass you. It said something along the lines of, it was either to try to embarrass the other side so much that it's like, well, since I basically said you're trying to murder me, now any discussion that we have is, well, do you want to kill me or not? That's not what the complaint was with the Chappelle. The complaint was that it was transphobic, and while I'm very much aware, and this is not an insignificant point, if you make transphobic jokes, even if they're just jokes, they can have negative consequences for other people who take them seriously in real life. And there are states in this country where it's basically, it's legal to go out and murder a trans person so long as you were not aware, like right before you murdered them, that they were trans, and they made you uncomfortable. As long as those two things are met, you can murder them and you're okay. And there are laws that say it's okay to kill them. It wasn't laws. I think it was the what was it? I think it was an interpretation by the court that basically said yes, if you can have that fight or flight response, and if you kill a trans person because you thought they were a cis woman and you found out they were a trans woman, it's okay. There's like at least 4 states, I think, that have that as a precedent. Certainly anywhere south of the Mason-Dixon line, you run that risk. So that's terrifying. That's terrifying to live there. So, yes, it's not a huge leap to make the argument that these kinds of jokes, even if they were just jokes, and the argument isn't that they were just jokes. The argument was he was saying genuinely transphobic things. I see that argument. It's got merit to it. But it doesn't mean that he wants to kill trans people. May or may not mean he's transphobic, depending. And it's very hard to have a conversation once you start at that. So, okay. Porpoise is not entirely correct on that, and we can get into it. I was going to try to avoid it. She didn't. Yeah, that's not quite what happened. But please, what were you going to say?
I was reading because you said somebody was wrong, so I had to see.
Yeah. Well, me thinking somebody's wrong was not okay. So let's talk a little bit about what he's. So 𝐬𝐸𝐺 called me up and asked if I'd seen it. I said no, I hadn't, but I was.
The first thing that comes to mind is the National Enquirer.
All right, now I'm hoping, can someone from the live chat confirm that we've reconnected to the show? I don't know, this just started happening last week. Is the software that runs the show has been spontaneously resetting. So, I can. So I'm going to assume we're reconnected. I hope we're reconnected. The good news is okay. Perfect. Thank you. So, anyway, so 𝐬𝐸𝐺 had said that he had seen it twice, and I was just like, well, that's a little cerebral. I think once is sufficient to understand what he was saying. I said, well, what do you know about what he was saying and doing? I said, well, this is what I heard about some of these jokes. And he said, well, I think you'd need to see it in context. I said, well, yeah, that's why I need to, I'm going to go look at it and see the jokes. And he was just like, well, I saw it twice. I was like, oh yeah, okay, good for you. So I was trying to get out of him what's in there, so at least I know what I'm looking for. Because, yeah, I want to see it in context, but that means I'll go to the joke, and then I'll go back some steps and then see it in context. And he wouldn't give me an answer as to what I was looking for. And I know he knows what I'm looking for. He says this isn't his first rodeo. So I'm sitting there going like, just could you give me a hint? Like, where is it? Beginning, middle, end? And he's just like, well, it's it's the entire piece. I was like, oh, don't worry, I'll see it, which was a complete fucking lie. I had no interest. Listen, I was behind on the research. I had to do the show. He added one other thing. I'd like to spend some time with my kids. When I'm with my kids, I'm saying I should be doing more for the show. I'm doing stuff for the show. I was like, why aren't I with my family? Like, I'm not going to just watch the whole thing. So I go. He really was giving me nothing, and I hate very little more than being predictable. And I don't know why. It's just a thing, and I've just sort of realized that it doesn't actually bug most people. But when somebody successfully predicts my behavior, it bugs the living shit out of me. And I realized after the fact that there's a very specific reason he did it the way he did it, because he knew exactly what I would do. He knew if he told me to go see the whole thing, I'd blow him off. So he didn't say that. But he also wouldn't give me anything to work with, so I'd have to look for it. Well, it didn't take very long for me looking for it. The first thing I found was Dave Chappelle saying that a joke about punching a gay guy in the 𝐒𝐻. And holy shit. And I really like Chappelle's old material. His previous special, I thought was really, it's just him sitting around, someone stole my jokes, I got ripped off by all these people, I got taken advantage of. And it's true, but it seems very sort of self-pitying, and but he said that, and I was just like, okay, I have to see the context of that. So screw that now. I can't even see the, I can't even see, I was going to say, that was the joke. I was going to say Nick-splaining. We're going to need a term, Nick-splaining. I don't mansplain because I'm a man. I mansplain because it's just me. I can't help it. It's got nothing to do. So, at any rate, so I end up going back trying to find that, and when I saw the whole joke in context, I got it, and I'm more than happy to explain the context, and it may be worth getting into, because that joke wasn't what it sounds like. It really wasn't. But you don't know that even going back 2 minutes. You got to go back 10 minutes because he sets these jokes up so long in advance. So finally, I was just like, oh shit, I'm not even going to find what I'm looking for. The only way to do it at this point is to see the whole thing. So I took an extra hour and a half because Marty lied when he said it was 45 minutes long. And I thought I had a pretty good handle on what this was about, and Chappelle definitely said a few things that I felt were inappropriate at a minimum. And it wasn't as funny as I would have liked. I remember thinking it was a lot funnier. I only really had a genuine belly laugh 5 or 6 times. So I was just like, some of it was kind of funny, but I was just like, okay, he's edgy like he kind of always is. And I wasn't, and I was trying to apply decent charity. So I'm not sitting there saying that he's a bad guy going into it, and I'm sure he's got, he suffers a lot, he talks about it, I get that, but, what's he saying and what's he mean by it? And then the last quarter of the show kicked in, and it changed everything, in my view, completely changed everything, and I realized why Marty fucking set me up the way he did, because there is no way, anybody who has seen just a few of these jokes, you haven't seen them in context. You can't see them in context until you see the entire act. And Marty knew I'd probably be dismissive of him if he said that to me, so he didn't leave me much of a choice, just left the little breadcrumbs, and because I'm predictable, I went and saw the whole thing. So right before the last 10, 15 minutes, I was just like, oh, we can discuss on the show this, and all the things that I disagree with, and everything changed. And then I got to the end and I said, you know what? I don't even think I'm going to be able to opine on this until I see it a second time. I already had to see it a second time. There was a very good reason to see it a second time. None of those jokes mean precisely what you think they do. And I'm not sure it's necessarily funnier, and I still object to some of the things he did. But I understand it a lot better, and I'm much harder pressed to say that even the jokes where he says things that are outright transphobic are actually transphobic jokes. And I wrote down a couple that I found interesting, but I don't take my word for it. Absolutely don't take my word for it. And I'm more than happy to hear I'm wrong, but not from anybody who hasn't seen the whole thing from beginning to end. I will not listen to any opinion on it from anybody on what is in that unless they've seen it from beginning to end. And hopefully, again, don't have to have any super amount of charity, but remember something that he ends up saying more than once, which is he's a flawed human being and he's suffering. And he points out more than once that he's probably suffering less than a lot of people, but that doesn't negate his suffering either. And he said a lot of things that I didn't expect him to say, including but not limited to how and why he supports trans rights and a whole bunch of other things that I didn't hear other people mentioning, including one which is, oh yes, I believe a trans woman is a woman. And one joke that, in my view, completely supports that. So there was a lot there. I don't know how much to get into. Again, it's you have to have seen it. This was not, and again, Rowdy just, I was played. And I was doing research. There's all this other shit we were going to cover today. Because, it's like we suddenly, no guest, what are we going to do? And I'm sitting there going, oh, that's why Marty called. He knew, I suspect he knew we had a show. Couldn't have known we didn't have a guest, but he knew we had a show. And that's it. So I was played. At any rate, I am taking a less nuanced or subtle approach to him and saying, I'm not prepared to. There's a couple of jokes I wrote down and I'm prepared to discuss, but I'm really not prepared to discuss the piece with anyone who hasn't seen it. And I would not feel too comfortable delving into it without seeing it a second time. By the time you finish it, you sit there and realize you have to see it a second time. So, I don't know. I guess, well, I don't know. So, do you have any thoughts? I've been going on for a little while there. I'm going to get some water anyway, so.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you were talking about, something that, because I heard clips that people, on a couple of podcasts, people were pulling out some clips of some of the stuff that he was saying and then, utterly attacking him for it. And I have a hard time when people just pull out clips. I mean, sometimes the clips are exactly what they are. And you can't really, there is no other context to it. They actually gave you. And then other times, the clip is taken completely out of context, just to attack somebody. And it's like, wait a minute. If this happens a lot in interviews too. It's like, wait a minute. If you actually watched the whole interview, you would realize that that clip, it doesn't mean what you think it means. You keep using that meme. I do not think it means what you meme it things.
Okay, that was actually, that took me a sec because I was getting some water. I was like, okay, that was pretty good. That was pretty good.
So, yeah, it's, but people are looking for sound bites, and that's kind of sort of the way that media goes, which is why I kind of like the long form, like when you're looking at interview type shows, or even just informational shows. That's why I like the long form a little bit more than the shorter ones. I mean, you can squeeze in a lot more shorter ones, but sometimes the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that things aren't very simple. Things are generally pretty damn complicated. And when you start trying to apply overly simplistic things, I mean, people will oversimplify things so that you can try and understand what you're talking about. Because if you just dive into all the minutia of something, people's eyes glaze over and they're like, oh my God. So I understand the need to be able to simplify things for, consumption, but there are some, you do that with the understanding that, I am simplifying it. It isn't this simple organically. I'm making it this simple just so that I can get the point across to you. And I think we've forgotten that we simplify things and that they're actually quite a lot more complicated. And I think that leads to a lot of misunderstanding. And some of it I think is genuine misunderstanding. Some of it I think is malicious. So, we're not, our disagreements amongst each other aren't civil, or are becoming less and less civil and more aggressive, especially in rhetoric.
Well, so when I saw the thing, I've been waiting the entire time for the J.K. Rowling bit, because that's the part I had heard the most about. And hold on, could it not be construed as so? Well, again, I think you need to see it, because it's his behavior in a number of areas, because he ends up misgendering a couple of times, and in each time it's kind of like nails on a chalkboard, like, ooh, you really shouldn't be doing that. And then you realize there's actually a point to it, and it's a much more nuanced and subtle point. And then when he does start talking about a very close friend of his who turned out to be trans, all of a sudden all the gendering becomes correct, and it seems to him very natural. And you realize he talks about his friendship with a trans woman, and if he's virtue signaling, it didn't seem that way to me. And there was a reason for why he switched modes, but you have to, again, have seen, I think, the show in order to understand what he was doing. Now, for example, he did in fact say that he was a TERF, and he said that what he said was, he actually said he disagreed with J.K. Rowling, but he understood her position. And he said it must have felt to her as it would a black man in blackface. And he made the distinction that that's not what it necessarily is, just what J.K. Rowling as a human being might be feeling. And he suggested that she needed some empathy. Now, he did also say in that same one that he was a TERF, but that's actually a callback to a joke that he had done a half hour prior, where he was talking about what does it mean to be a feminist. And he said he had actually never looked it up. And he looked it up, and what he found was, in Webster's, it was any person who believes that women should have equal rights. And he said, well, wait a minute, that's me. So I'm a feminist, and here it is, I never knew. And he runs with that for a little while. And so he said that he had looked up what does a TERF mean. And because he hadn't known, and he had been called this a lot, and he was just like, I don't know what these words mean. So he looks it up. And it says somebody who believes gender is real, I think was the definition. I think that was the definition he had found. So wait a minute, gender is real, because men, women, these are real things, and we have people in between, and that's all real. Isn't that the whole point? Is they're real, and we're acknowledging that. He goes, I'm a TERF, and I think the context of what he said that in kind of matters. He said something else that I thought was interesting. He said, these laws, these bathroom laws, he goes, they're absolutely targeted at certain people. He goes, it ain't me. When I go into the men's room, I'd be really uncomfortable if there was a woman next to me. And if, she whips out a penis, I'd be really uncomfortable. So I'd be like, what are you doing in here? Now, if a guy comes next to me and starts using the urinal, I don't care if the guy's standing or sitting down. I don't care if the guy's got a vagina or not. I don't care. It's the men's room. Where else is a guy going to go? And he goes off on this. Is he virtue signaling? I don't think so. I don't think he's making it up. And the reality is, I don't know. But when you look at all his jokes combined, he's got very specific reasons for one. And he did one, the one that offended me. Until I realized what he was saying, and I thought he was being very honest about a very difficult topic, and he deliberately misgendered. But I'm sitting there when he's talking about he doesn't in the men's room. He wants a man using the men's room, only men. Doesn't matter if they have a penis. Doesn't matter if they have a vagina. Just has to be a guy. I'm sitting there going, if that's transphobic, and it may be, I'm not. When it comes to the serious nuance on this, I'm willing to accept it may be. But I have a hard time believing it, certainly without more information than I have. That strikes me as a position, and he just goes off on that for a while. It goes off, but the one that got me, though, was he deliberately misgendered, and in a very offensive way, a trans woman in a whole series of jokes. And he was talking to a mom, but there's serious background to that too. So he had been set up, and a woman had been talking to him and said, "Oh, do you want to see my?" And this was after he had already gotten in trouble for previous shows where he was identified as transphobic. And he said, "Oh, do you?" Somebody had said, a woman had said, "Oh, do you want to see my?" They've been talking for like 20 minutes. He said, "Oh, do you want to see my daughter? She's in Hollywood." She goes, "Yeah." He didn't really want to, but he was trying to be polite. So he goes, "Oh, yeah, sure." Shows a picture of her daughter and goes, "Oh." She goes, "What do you think?" She goes, "Oh, I think she's beautiful. I think she's going to do really well. I wish her the best of luck." And she goes, "Well, she's trans." And then he's like, "Oh shit, okay, set up." So you just admitted that you found it, and then he goes off. And what he says later is all of this was in his mind. He didn't say any of this. Well, if it's in his mind, okay. Well, my daughter, when she was 2, contracted RSV and was in the hospital. We were in our 2nd week in the hospital, and there was a friend of the family who is still a friend of the family, but I will never forget this. I'm not even sure I've forgiven her for this, but whether I do or don't, I have not forgotten. At one point, she had said, this friend said, "I will pray for your daughter." And I remember realizing that I probably would have to figure out exactly how to answer this the right way, or I was going to get my ass in some form of trouble. Didn't have the energy anymore, so I just said thank you and left it at that. She grinned from ear to ear, and she realized, she's like, gotcha. Because she's never been pleased with the fact I'm an atheist and has made no bones about it. And here she is, and she's decided that, well, there are no atheists in foxholes, and there are no atheist fathers when their daughter is in the ICU unable to breathe without a tube. And the first thought that went through my mind is, you motherfucking cunt. I will shove your bogus God so far up your fucking ass for weaponizing my... I said thank you, not because I believe, but because it's the same thing you do when your grandma hands you your green socks for Christmas, the pea green. You say thank you. It's like, but to you, it's this huge victory that has to be had in a battle that I have no interest in fighting right now, right in front of my daughter's hospital bed. And it's extremely rare I have any violent thoughts of any kind. I came across the thought of smacking her right then and there. And some of the worst, most horrible, vile things I've ever thought of any human being went through my head at that moment. And at that moment, I meant every fucking one of them. And I won't apologize for any of it. I don't feel that way now, but I've never forgotten the incident, and I never will. She was weaponizing. My daughter was there, and that I said thank you, which I did out of politeness. Now, Chappelle's point was how this woman had weaponized the fact that he was being polite. He didn't think that the woman that he was looking at looked particularly attractive, but what's he going to say to a stranger? And so he goes off on this entire thing, and I'm sitting there going, everything he said was absolutely disgusting, but they were almost identical to the thoughts that I had when I was set in a similar trap. Now, he was at a bar, he wasn't, okay. And I'm not saying he's not transphobic, he may well be. But I think you need to see what he's saying in the full context of the show. And again, I found what he was saying there horrible. But he admits he was just thinking it, and he was just thinking it for a split second, and I've thought even worse in almost identical situations. So, like I said, I just wanted, because J.K. Rowling has come back, he actually didn't defend J.K. Rowling, unless I missed it. He didn't. What he said was he understood her point of view, and I guarantee you, I have no doubt in my mind that he has a lot more empathy for the trans point of view. Again, if you just watch the show to the end. If you just watch the show to the end, he has a lot more empathy and understanding than I think he's getting credit for. And I think if you assume that he's out there to cause trouble, if you take these clips without seeing the show, yeah. You know, that clip, the clip about I am a TERF, yeah, again, you have to see the jokes that were set up 30 minutes prior. Again, I'm not saying he isn't, but I think it's much more nuanced than that. And I think he was deliberate in his choice of how and when he said particularly offensive things. For another point that he made repeatedly about the suffering of all people, including how trans people trying to get their rights mirror the civil rights movement. And in fact, that he was so pleased that they had more success faster than black people in this country, and that for black people it took longer. And he made an argument which I thought was a very difficult argument to make, but he said in part, maybe that was because there are a lot of white trans people. And cis males like myself find it easier to identify with trans people who are at least white than with black people. Is that true? Should you be comparing the suffering of minorities? Maybe not. But the point he was trying to make was, if that's the case, maybe there are people in the trans community who are comparing their suffering to his and maybe don't know his story, which I don't think is a bad argument. Now, once you know his story, if you think he's full of shit, great. But I think he's right that people should at least listen. Would a trans person watching it think the same thing? That's a very good question, Barbara. That's a perfect question. That is a perfect question. I don't know. I don't know. That's why, I hope people will see it. I understand people who don't want to, but then again, they're going based on what they've heard, not what they've seen. What were you going to say, Zandering? Sorry.
I'm sure I had something intelligent and pithy to say, but I don't remember what it was.
I doubt it, but that's all right.
That's entirely possible, too. One of the things that I would like to point out from a previous comment was, the idea that sometimes you can't be civil to really get the change that you need, I guess a revolutionary change or whatever, civility that never achieves that. One of the few, if you take civility off the table, in disagreements, the way that you solve disagreements at that point is generally through violence.
Yeah.
What options do you have if you have disagreements and you need to solve those disagreements and you're going to take civility away as an option, being civil to each other? What options are left? Most of them are violent. And that doesn't usually end well. That's why I'm an advocate for being civil to each other and to try, and to see the person that you're talking to as an actual human being who could possibly just be misguided. It's like I see a lot of times, and this may not be the case, but it seems, from my point of view, this is the way it appears to me, that more and more people are assuming the other person is a bad person or arguing not in good faith. They're not giving them the benefit of the doubt that they may just be wrong and not know it, and that they're not a bad person, I mean, I've been accused of a lot of things. I've been called just about everything I can think of, and it's like I really don't think I'm a bad person. It's like, well, let's go have lunch. I don't think you'll come away thinking I'm the next Hitler in the making. At least I hope not.
Well, and I think that's what concerns me. I think that's why, and I want to bring up a couple of things. First of all, I mean, we brought up the difference between North and South, and this being the most divided time, and there are plenty of people on both sides who are preparing to do violence. And it's maybe my biased impression. It feels like there's more people in the South saying we're about ready to start shooting people to defend our freedoms. I think we're having a hard time with this kind of civil discourse. And again, Porpoise brought up. Porpoise has been bringing up a lot of very good points. She brought up one too, that people never willingly give up power, and I think that's true. But I do think, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. was civil, and I think he treated even his oppressors with dignity and respect, and called white people his brothers. And I think if he hadn't done that, he would not have been so successful. I think Daryl Davis was civil, and I think that if a black man can be civil to a KKK leader and break bread with him, and if it works, I think there's something to be said for that technique. I'm not against violence when you have to do it. I've been mistaken for a pacifist, and I was like, oh, if you had been around for World War II, I'd have said go over and kick Hitler's ass. So I'm not a pacifist, but I think that once people stop talking, they start. I think you're right. They start killing each other, and I think, the kid in the almost every school shooter has at some point said, nobody was listening to me. The guy who, Texas A&M shooter, the guy in New Zealand, they were killing Muslims. Why? Because nobody would listen to me about my views on Muslims. Yeah, there are certain views on Muslims you can't say anymore, and I think they're wrong. And maybe by promulgating them, you're making some problems worse. But by not letting people do it, what's the alternative? They decide to go out and kill people, create bombs. They become terrorists. They say, everything's a conspiracy because I'm not being. I think there are ways to have these conversations and try to minimize the destruction that can be had. I don't think you have to platform these people, but I don't think you have to shut them down either, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, you don't have to necessarily agree with them or want to have a conversation with them, but saying that they can't have a conversation someplace or attacking somebody for allowing them on their show, and you say, well, you're just platforming an evil person. I have issues with that because I suppose there can be, I can see hypotheticals in which, not platforming somebody would be the right choice.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm like, but I still kind of want to know what their ideas are so I know how bad of a person this is or how good of a person this is. It's like if they never get to espouse their views, how do you know whether they actually are a good or bad person? Because you don't actually know what their views are. If you just take other people's words for it, well, I don't know how many times I have seen people talk about, well, this person believes this, and then I go back and watch hours and hours and hours of video of this person. It's like I can find nowhere where they have ever said that they supported this. And yet there's a large group of people, or at least a vocal minority of people who swear that that's what this person stands for. And I'm like, I don't see it. Where? Please point this out to me. And
And now I know who you're talking about. 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have known. Now I know. I don't say it. You hadn't been said it. I think it's because you don't want to derail it. I appreciate that. Like,
I don't want to go. I don't want to go down a separate rabbit hole about something. So I'm not going to name names, but yes, I've and it's not just that. I remember I talked to you about this person, but they're not the only one. I've seen it happen a lot, and I've had it happen to me. I've had people, say that I support blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, wait a minute. When did I ever say that I actually supported that? And it's like, because I don't. And I don't recall saying that I did, but something I said that probably didn't really have anything to do with that topic, because I said something else. They're like, well, if you believe this, therefore you must be in support of this. And it's like, well, not necessarily. And there are, I've even pointed out some issues where I'm like, between consequentialism versus moralism, where I'm like, I'm kind of stuck here, because on the one hand, I believe in this moral, and yet I can see instances where that could work out poorly consequentially, or it could have negative consequences that I'm not okay with. And I don't know how to resolve that yet. So, like, cut me a break here. I'm trying. It's like I'm not setting out to be the next Hitler or Stalin or Mao.
Well, and all of us,
really trying to be a good person. But I also am trying to get at what is actually real and be reasonable. And I don't think I think that there are several movements out there that have very unreasonable parts to them.
I think the problem is, I have never known anybody who doesn't have views with which I don't have some pretty significant disagreement. And my guess is that if I knew truly what, if everybody bared their soul and so on and so forth, would find some pretty detestable views for almost anybody. And at a minimum, nobody was born having all the right views. So those of us who have, quote, better views or more, more humanist views, which I think are better, has come over time. We weren't born this way, and we had to see the suffering of other people. We had to feel suffering ourselves. We had to find a way to get empathy, and probably almost all of us were at some point terribly dismissive of the suffering of other people. And then we learn it, and we feel shame in ourselves for what we did, and we learn and we grow, and that's how we do it. Other human beings can do this too, and some never will, and some will take advantage of people who try to communicate. And as somebody who always has his heart on his sleeve and is always who's always assuming that everybody else is having the best possible charity and positive conversation going forward, because that's what I'm always trying to do, I'm wrong probably more often than I'm right. But I think that's still also the only way you end up going forward in the long run. And maybe it's somebody I can't talk to, but maybe it's somebody else can, because my views have not always been perfect either. And I've stood by views that I'm sitting there going like, what the fuck was I thinking? And there are some people who are going to have them. Some people are going to have them because of how they were raised. And you know what? I had the luxury of being raised not only in a pretty liberal household, but around a lot of people, which exposed me to a lot of different ideas. So I'm not going to be that way as much as people who, grew up in a small town of 500 people in a one-room schoolhouse. They don't have a lot of exposure. Going to be a lot more bigoted in general. It's not their fault. It doesn't mean that you can sit there and excuse it either, and that's not what I'm trying to say. And my hope is that people understand that. But they're human beings who are also trying to do their best to make their way in the world. And there are good people who have really bad ideas, and there are bad people who have really bad ideas. Sorting out which is which takes time. It's not easy. And like I said, me personally, I get it wrong more often than I get it right. That I always think I shouldn't. I don't know why. I keep thinking I keep wish thinking. I'll admit. I keep thinking if I'm as honest as I possibly can be, that will encourage other people to be honest. That's not been my experience, but I can't seem to stop trying. So sometimes to the detriment of people around me, unfortunately. But it is what it is. Yeah. There was another thing that he does throughout the entire show that I thought was important, which is he does compare women's rights with trans rights and with civil rights. And he compares the movements and gay rights. And that I can tell when he starts the comparison, he's for all of them. And he says he's for all of them. He mocks all of them, including civil rights. Makes fun of everybody. But mentions how he had at one point said that he had issues with the Me Too movement. His issue was he thought they weren't taking it seriously. Said, they said, what, we're going to wear all black clothes to the Golden Globes? He goes, no, don't go. If you don't like being on the back of the bus, don't get on the bus. Okay, that was his argument against the Me Too movement. That they don't go to the Golden Globes. He said, you know what you do? Go down to the mailroom of whoever your agency, fire your agent. Go down to the mailroom, find the woman who's the most dogged, tenacious woman who just hasn't been given a break, and say, you're our agent. And then everybody just start working through her. You want to hire a woman in Hollywood, which they need, you got to go through this lady. And then you guys start making demands. That's it. Don't go to the Golden Globes. Don't participate. See what happens next. May or may not agree, but that is how the civil rights movement did it, and I see his point. And at least his claim is that got misconstrued as he was against the Me Too movement. I don't know if it did or didn't. Maybe he's making that shit up. Maybe he's virtue signaling. But I think he's got an interesting argument. And then he conflates it with, and then he says too, he talks about just the differences in the struggles. But he's comparing all of them reasonably equally. Pointed out, though, is like, it was when Jenner decided to get her transition into a woman, he said, that was easier than it was for Cassius Clay to change his name. So, look at how far our society has come. So he sees this as a plus. Again, I mean, I can sit here and say it all I want to. I think it's worth seeing. I think it's worth trying to see what he says when he's not complaining that Jenner was able to get a sex change, not sex change, sorry, was able to transition. What he's saying is our society's changed and seems to be suggesting more than once that it's a good thing. But again, it's nuanced. So anyways, that's it. Like I said, I can't do it. I think you should see it. Hey, but tell me I'm wrong. Go watch it. Tell me I'm wrong. I want to see it again because by the time you get to the end, you realize, at least I realized, in my view, some of the terrible things he'd been saying to make a larger point. This thing has a larger arc to it. And by the time he got to the end, it struck me that he had made that point. So
I find it really interesting.
Yep.
I find it really interesting that by a lot of the metrics used to measure the success of societies around the world, or just the life, whether things are better or worse, that by just about every metric, the world is the best it's ever been today.
Yes.
Never been better.
Yes.
When you look at the number of absolute poverty, you can argue about whether or not the United Nations has the correct number for what constitutes absolute poverty. They picked a number, and they were, just in between 2000 and 2012, they reduced that number by 50%. They moved people out of poverty or above that poverty line by 50%. Or reduced. How do I say that? I know what I want to say. They reduced the number of people below that line by 50%. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So yeah, they improved the situation by 50%. So by just about every metric, I'm sure you could probably pick out one or two where we could quibble about whether it's actually better or not. And yet, at least in the developed nations, there is this sense of impending doom that things are getting worse, at least amongst the political divides or the ideological divides are getting worse, that we're becoming more divided. And, there's a big sense that we're headed for pretty nasty times, that civility is breaking down. And once civility breaks down in society, violence follows. That's historically been true all through history.
Yeah.
So, the view going forward is like we're being less civil, more divided, and we're heading more towards a collision that's going to turn violent. And at the same time, all of the metrics that we use to measure whether things are better or worse, everything's getting better.
I'm going to disagree.
Interesting.
It has been up until the last 3 or 4 years. U.S. life expectancy has gone down. I think it was in the last 3 years for the first time in quite some time. Happiness indexes are starting to go down. Whether this is permanent or not, I don't know. But for the most part, in the last 20 years, health and happiness indexes have been going up on average across the world. Some countries have been going down, but for the most part, we are becoming more educated. We are having more free time. We have more things we can do with that free time. And that's largely due to automation, electronics, computers, so on and so forth. We have better health care than, for the most part, just about any other time in human... Well, what do I mean for the most part? Than at any other time in human history. Yeah, and of course the U.S., is living in the lap of luxury by that standard, but most other countries aren't doing so bad themselves, and the ones that are kind of making some effort, and some of them to fix and turn around. Some were not. That's on us. But yeah, overall we've been doing very well. Recently, the numbers have started to dip, but we'll see.
Yeah, like I said, I'm sure that there's places where you can quibble about whether it's actually getting better or not.
Yeah,
but looking back through history, we've made some amazing achievements in bringing people out of abject poverty, and to the point where we can debate whether and have the debate about making our workplaces more egalitarian, so that you have free choice to choose what actually interests you and to pursue what actually interests you. Because 100 years ago, you didn't really have the choice to choose what really interested you. Most people, the overwhelming majority of people in the world, couldn't choose that. That was dictated by, the world around you. You did what you had to do just to survive. So, you didn't get to have your leisure time and choose what you wanted to do with it. You were too busy trying to survive. So, things have gotten particularly good. And one of the reasons why, somebody mentioned, I saw it scroll by, somebody was talking about, we weren't very civil when it came to the Civil War. We actually fought a war over ending slavery. So, but we're like the only country that really did. I mean, Britain got rid of slavery without a war. Yep. They were civil about it. So just because we fought a war over it doesn't mean that was the only way that we could have done it. But, good point. We did fight a war to try and end slavery, and that wasn't a particularly civil thing to do. So there, and the American Revolution, the entire United States was born out of a revolution, which wasn't particularly civil either. So it's just that we look at all the people that are hurt in it as well. Don't forget that it's going to cause real suffering when civility completely breaks down and violence breaks out. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'm really hoping that we can get to points where we can, live together and peace and harmony and all that happy Zen stuff, without resorting to to having to kill people.
Keep in mind, we're also talking about two very different scales. The reality is, I think when you talk to individuals, you should be talking to that individual, and you should recognize them as an individual and a human being who breathes the same air you do, and ostensibly has roughly the same hopes and dreams for their own lives and for the lives of their children as you do, or however much you disagree on other issues. You could look at anybody who was a slave owner, and Chappelle makes this point as well, which is he pointed out that there was a slave. I forget the name of the slave. I guess they're making a movie about it. I don't know. But there was a slave who had been beaten and really poorly treated and was freed and even given some land of his own. And it turned out he was very enterprising, and he decided he wanted to make a lot of money. So he went into the slave trade and started buying slaves, breeding slaves, and was so brutal to his slaves that other plantation owners around him were like, whoa, you need to back off, and this is a former slave, and he says, and so why was the guy doing it? Was he what was it in him? Then he goes, this is how they decided to make money at the time, and this is what he was just going to be the best he could, and he ended up. But when you're talking to whoever you're talking to, a member of the KKK or whatever, you're talking to a person. The South wasn't a person. It was a whole bunch of people who were not going to give up their slaves, and maybe if all of us had decided to collectively talk to all of them and spend 20, 30 years doing it, okay. No, not even okay. Now, we wouldn't have done it in 30 years, 50 years maybe. That's too long to wait. That's too long to wait with slavery. That's why I said earlier, I'm not against violence, but I think you should try to minimize it as much as possible, and I think that you don't have to engage on it on a scale yourself. I think if we all make better conversations, it will make the need for violence a lot less. You'll never eliminate it. When we had to go into the South, we had to go into Germany. The Revolutionary War was no doubt worth fighting, as was many of the countries, all the countries that left Britain. But that has absolutely no bearing on anything I'm saying. The reason is because those were countries or parts of countries that were going to war with each other. If you've already decided we're going to have to fight another war with the South, well, then treat them any way you like. Nothing you do is going to change things. I don't think we have to, and I'd like to avoid it if possible. And I think that's done in part by recognizing each other's humanity. Once that's no longer possible, we're fighting a war, and that's not going to be done civilly. I do think also, while I agree, civil disobedience is actually still usually done with civil behavior. I admit, you're breaking laws, okay. But again, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. even treated the police officers who tried to arrest him and beat them with respect and said he forgave them. That's civil behavior. So, yeah. I guess we've said enough about it. I don't know. Part of me doesn't really want to talk about the end of the show, but I guess I might as well at this point, and since it's already been brought up, how the show ended. So he was talking about all of the trouble he got into for his last show on trans rights and all these other things, and he explains what he had meant to say and why he said it and how it got taken out of context and where he was. And then he said that he had a friend who was a trans woman. And I noticed, again, from this point going forward, he was always correctly identifying her gender. And if he had any transphobia towards this woman, I couldn't tell. And he was talking about her and his experiences with her and how they became friends over her opening for him in a show. But then when he went on, she started taking notes because she just wanted to be a better comedian. And then at one point, she started sort of talking to him, and he started bantering back and forth. And then they just started laying into each other about cis and trans and the whole 9 yards. And then at one point, he took it too far. And she said, "You know what? I don't owe you any explanations. Can't you just see that I'm a human being and I'm hurting?" And he said he realized that was all there was to it. That they had bonded over the fact that they were each human beings and they were hurting. And all she was a human being who didn't have to justify anything to him. And then 10 days, the next day, I guess, he got in trouble, I guess, a couple days afterwards for his trans comments. And she decided to come to his defense. And the same thing that happened to Rachel Oates when she went to the defense of Rationality Rules happened to her. She was accused of betraying all trans women, that she wasn't ever really a trans woman herself, that she wasn't all that shit. And 10 days later, she killed herself. So maybe he's virtue signaling. I don't know. I think you need to watch the show and decide. And if he's the kind of guy who can lie about that and just then he's a fucking pile of shit. I believed him. And I believed he cared about her and set up a trust fund for her kid. And I believe he'd probably do anything to get her back. Doesn't mean he's not. Listen. There are trans people who are transphobic. There are gay people who are homophobic. And there are black people who are racist. He made that crystal clear throughout the entire show. And, but I don't think you're going to be able to reach a conclusion unless you watch the entire show and you see just what it is he's saying. Because once you realize that every time he was doing these jokes, he was making fun of the people who are actually being transphobic, but you don't realize that till you get to the end. As for Rachel Oates, as I said earlier, she actually did come to his defense. She said that Rachel Oates disagreed with his opinions, disagreed with his video, disagreed with what he had done, but she wanted people to leave him alone. And that she felt he was a good person and he didn't deserve what was happening to him. And, well, you can't say that. Oh, don't ever say that. That's the show. Anything else? Any other thoughts?
I'm trying to read. Why can't I read and talk at the same time? I should be able to do that.
Yes, you should. I'm gonna insult your intelligence and say that it's because you're a bad person.
Yes, because I can't read and talk because I'm a bad person.
Exactly. We are so on the same page now.
Well, there's a lot of people that actually agree with you that I'm a bad person. So
I haven't listened. There are plenty of people who think I'm a bad person too. So we're in the same boat.
I think anybody who puts an opinion out there has a group of people that think they're a bad person.
I think that's true, and I really thought I would be I genuinely thought I would be the exception to that, because and so many people are like, Nick, you're one of the nicest people we've ever met, and so on and so forth. But look, Hillary Clinton was running a porn pedophile ring out of a pizza. I was just like, you know what? No, the more public you are, the more people will hate you for whatever, and you just have to have a thick skin to it to some extent. And it does make me think that I do question the human race at times when I see deliberate cruelty and all this other stuff. But I think I don't know. Yeah, if you're out there, there isn't a content. Mowdy's a great guy. I love Mowdy. I bust his balls, and I am going to get him for this because it's completely derailed, and he fucking knew it. He fucking knew it. That's why he set it up the way he did. There are people who hate Mowdy, which blows my mind. I'm like, okay, wait. This is a psychology professor whose jam is making pasta, like having conversations around the dinner table that are like civil conversations, and mindfulness. Right? He does like mindful meditation. This is the guy who you're gonna hate on, but He's got his detractors, which really should give me more pleasure than it does, only because it should make me feel better about my own detractors. But I'm a perfectionist. It's like, well, wait a minute, man, there must be some way to get people to understand that really just a good human being. Okay, yeah, no, it's nope. Oh.
Well, I found that most of the people who actually have outright called me a bad, evil person aren't particularly interested in what I actually believe. They're only interested in shoving me in that box so they don't have to deal with me anymore. So, but human beings are human beings, and we're social animals, and we seek the approval of our group. So when you have people come out and blatantly attack you and call you horrible person, it's really hard not to let that affect you, and it does affect you. It's a matter of what you do about it. Some people can handle it better than other people. Some people have a bigger response to the crowd around them attacking them. They have, and we vary in our ability to take criticism. We vary in our abilities, to handle criticisms. And criticism always affects you. The people who says, well, I just don't give a shit what other people say. That's mostly true, but you get enough people that say the same thing about them, they are going to care on some level at some point.
Yeah.
Or they're a sociopath.
Well, yeah, exactly. Good point.
So it can be. Sometimes it can be really hard. It's like you put something out there. It's like, look, I've thought about this a lot, and this is kind of what I think. I think I'm being reasonable here. And then you get, even if it's just like a vocal minority, but if it's loud enough and persistent enough, and you're like, wow, am I really that bad of a person because I think this is a rational position to take? I think this is true. And, it's like, I don't hate anybody. It's not like I'm saying that, we should be hanging people off of buildings or anything. So, it can be difficult.
There's a question in the live chat I'd like to get to. Actually, there's a couple, but the other thing is for me. I'm still learning how to deal with it, and I wonder if anybody ever fully does. I don't like Hillary Clinton's a great example, or Bill Gates, or any of these other. I suppose in the end it comes down to just don't watch it. I used to never believe anybody. When people sat there and said, "Oh, I haven't watched what the news said about me or this or that," I was like, "Oh, you liar! Of course you did." And then when I started to get really negative stuff about me, I started to watch it because I was like, I really want to know what people are saying. I was like, it's too toxic for me. I was just like, I can't hear this shit about myself. So I couldn't. So at this point now, it's just like I don't pay attention. So one of the things I do is shut them out if at all possible. But there's this other part of me too that just gets kind of bitter. Admittedly, too, of course, we are all the hero of our own story, right? So it's very hard. I do sometimes sit there and say, "Ooh, yeah, I fucked this up and I did this," and some of these criticisms have. But we're all the hero of our own story, so we're not like it's like nope. Anybody who really thinks I fucked up is just way off. And so, sort of coming to terms with a world that's going to tell you, "Hey, you ain't as perfect as you think you are," whether legit or not, it takes time to reconcile it. And for me, has definitely made me bitter, and I'm trying to overcome that. But for me, it's a conscious process saying I don't want to be that bitter guy. But it's not just attacks on me. It's just it's all the division we've been talking about, right? It's all the attacks everybody does on everybody. It's watching us. I keep thinking of that scene from. And then I definitely got to get to the live chat, so I'll get there in a second. Especially Christopher Mann said something I want to get to, but there's a scene in. And by the way, evolutionarily, there's a reason we're this way. I don't have to like it, but there is a reason we're this way. But there's a scene in Galaxy Quest. They see all these cute little animals, creatures coming out, like, oh, they're really cute. And there's one injured one, like, oh, look, they're helping the injured one get some water. And then they all jump on and murder the injured one. And I was like, yeah, that's humanity. And it's not, you don't see that every day, you don't see that, but you do see that in a lot of our behaviors. So one reason why it's, you and I were talking about being vulnerable on camera, and Oz is one of these people that is vulnerable on camera, and I was just like, it really works for him, and he manages to work with it, but there's also this sort of, you're going to get attacked, because that's what we do with vulnerable people. It's where I do want to get your response to that, but I also want to get your response to one other thing. So Christopher Mann has said, do you two consider yourselves socially liberal, conservative, or centrist? I'm clearly to the left of you two. Are people like me part of the problem in your view? And I'd like to see what else he said. If he could, while we're having this discussion, explain like him what that means, because I don't know what views he's talking about, that we need to figure out the like him. I mean, I don't know if he's a Leninist Marxist or what, but anyway, so a whole bunch there for you to process.
I guess if you're just talking about socially, I'm socially very liberal. I mean, I don't give a crap what you want to do with your life as long as you're not violating the rights of other people. It's your life, and you should, live it the way you'd like to live it. I'm very, I identify as libertarian, because I don't like large federal governments. I think they become abusive and eventually turn tyrannical, and they slowly strip the rights of individuals. And I think that they do things poorly, and so I don't like large government, federal governments. I would like to see government kept as close to the local level as possible, because you're not just nameless, faceless masses at that point. If you have to look people in the eye that you know the names of and justify to them why you made the policies that you made, it becomes a lot harder, or made the decisions you made. It becomes a lot harder to be crooked and make bad policy, because you're facing people that you actually know. So I'd like to keep government as local as possible, and I'd like to keep the farther and bigger farther away from you, and the bit larger government becomes, the worse it gets. So I would like to see small government, but socially, I haven't seen any. I care about people, and I think people should be able to live. People are human beings and deserve to be treated with respect until they lose that right. And there are some people that have been out there that have kind of lose the right to be treated with respect. So, but
anyone in particular you're thinking of, or, obviously me, but anyone aside from?
I was gonna say rhymes with ick.
Fucking okay.
But So yeah, I guess fiscally and governmentally very conservative, socially very liberal. And I guess I don't know what you mean by are people like you the problem. I don't think leftists are necessarily the problem. I think when they go off on ideological rants that aren't based in actual reality or on fact, I think that becomes a problem, and that's a problem no matter what your political bent is. I mean, that's always a problem, and I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have with some of the political systems is that they spout off rhetoric about what they want the world to be instead of recognizing what it actually is and what things have actually worked and what things don't work. So I think both sides tend to live in a fairy tale, and I'm not immune to living in a fairy tale, but at least I'll listen to you when you want to make an argument about something.
All right, and then I don't know if Christopher is still in the live chat. I hope he didn't bail waiting for us. He may have. Yeah, so my answer to that is I'm sort of centrist in terms of economics. I'm a big fan of capitalism. I think capitalism, has a number of drawbacks, but for the most part, it's the best system that we've ever gotten. I think it does need some regulation. Like, you have to acknowledge the fact every time you try to regulate it, there's going to be blowback in a way that you may not have anticipated. It's very hard to, you really can't put your thumb on the scale of capitalism without it going up somewhere else. But corporations will absolutely violate absolutely every human right they can if they can get away with it. So you have to find a way to keep them in check. That's going to be involving government regulation. Also, there is a trinity that you really can't screw with and have to be, quote, socialized. We've covered this before, and I'm just using the common vernacular here, but police and fire are two of them. We understood why. I think it was in 1467, I want to say. New York fire, no, 1487. It was 1487. New York fire burned down all of New York, and it started with one house that burnt down, but the house didn't have the private fire insurance, so a private fire company wouldn't put it out. Spread to the next two houses. They didn't have the insurance, so they didn't put it out. By the time it spread to a house that did have insurance, the fire was too hard to stop, and it burned down half of New York. And this is why basically everybody has to have fire insurance. You do that by just socializing the fire department. Same thing with the police department, and same thing with healthcare. There's a reason every single police officer has in their squad car, they have basic health tools. You find the same thing in a fire truck. You'll find, a defibrillator and all sorts of medical equipment. There's a reason. There are the three parts of a tripod. They all need to be largely socialized. You can privatize some elements of healthcare, but yeah. So I'm mostly, some parts of it conservative parts. So I call myself a centrist, a mixed economy. Keynesian, basically, is the closest you'd go for. And then pretty liberal, too. I'm not left of Lenin, so I am liberal, and I am sort of, that's it. I'm a liberal. I'm an idealist. I get a little troubled where I do think there is a regressive left. I think that regressive left is causing some problems. I disagree with cancel culture in general. What that means, we've covered before, and is up to interpretation, but I think most people sort of understand generally where that puts me. I think the left can go too far too, but I'm definitely pretty far on the left. So hopefully that answers those questions. I haven't seen Christopher back, so I think maybe out of it. So I think we should start wrapping it up. I see a few other people have joined us. Randolph has joined us. So thank you for...
Hey, Randolph. He made a frowny face. I hope the frowny face wasn't at me.
If capitalists can't get away... If capitalists can't get away, that's why fines aren't necessarily the solution. I think fines are important, but what he said was, okay, they'll commit the violation if it's affordable enough. Exactly, they will make a capitalist decision on the fine, and they will poison the water, kill everybody if the fine costs less. How many car companies have just figured out, okay, what's the cost of a recall versus the cost of the lawsuits from not doing the recall, and then they act accordingly. But that's because in this country we have divorced the decisions and the actions of the CEO with the consequences for the company and other people outside the company. So right now, as long as they're acting in the best interest of the company, it's very hard to sue somebody in the company, no matter what law they break. and it's very hard to keep track of this kind of thing. That has to be put a stop to, and we have to find a way to not say that your number one obligation in a company is to, I don't mind saying that your number one obligation is to the shareholders, but that has to have with the caveat, absent violating the law and or committing atrocities against other human beings. How you do that, what that looks like, I don't entirely know. But if it's fines, finding the company is worthless. Finding the company at best finds the people who actually pay the fines, which is the customers. That's unless you put the company out of business, and most of them can find other jobs. So no, that's not how you do it. I think there's other fixes, but there you go. Jail the rich. I'm not as far from that as one might think. Aren't fined. Well, either or personally fined. Yeah, personally fined and or jailed. Oh God. The irrefutable proof that this country has an obsession with capitalism that is so unhealthy it borders on psychotic was the fact that, to the best of my knowledge, we still haven't jailed one person involved in, actually I think we did jail one, but it wasn't one of the bankers involved in the 2007-2008 financial collapse. They were doing seriously unethical and illegal shit. They were creating products that were so bad they knew they were bad, they'd sell them to their customers and then buy insurance on the fact that these were going to fail, betting against their own customers because they knew they were selling bad products. That actually should be illegal in a capitalist society. It usually kind of is, but at any rate, none of these people really suffered any jail. So, Christopher is back. I don't know if, Christopher, you've been here the whole time, but we did our best to answer your questions. So if you have anything else you want to follow up on, please let me know. Otherwise, yeah, I think it's too easy to hide behind the company did it and the financial collapse. People don't realize, and I'd be curious to get your take on this, Xandering, but my view is the United States was probably within 24 hours of collapsing completely, as in no more United States, the country gone in sort of the same way the Soviet Union collapsed. And Bush, of all people, saved us. Well, he didn't really save us. He just signed on the dotted line, which is all he had to do. But that infusion probably saved the U.S. economy. If that hadn't happened, we would have seen rioting in this country, the likes of which you've never seen before. There'd have been no money anywhere, and the entire economy would have collapsed. And without that, the U.S. doesn't exist anymore. And we were about 24 hours away from it. That's my view of the 2007-2008 collapse. Your thoughts?
I think that it was very close to being incredibly bad. Whether the U.S. has gone through some pretty horrible things in the past, and it has managed to pull itself together. So as far as would there have been an economic collapse, I think probably there would have been, and I think we were damn close to it. Do I think Bush saved us? No. I think that Bush did the only politically expedient and probably the least painful at the moment thing he could have done, and which allowed people, to continue on doing what they were doing without any real, change to the. I mean, they made some changes, but nothing at a fundamental level to prevent something happening in the future. I mean, it worked for a little while, and then we have a lot of this shenanigans going on again. But yeah, it would have been incredibly painful, and I'm not entirely sure whether the country would have pulled together, come together, and helped each other, or whether we would have torn each other apart. The longer we go on, I think the more it's more likely that we'll start tearing each other apart. I mean, we're doing it socially already. So I'm not, but people tend to rise to their best, the best they can be in times of very, in very bad times. So sometimes it takes those really bad times for the best in everybody to come through. So, and I'm cautiously optimistic that if there's a serious issue, like say financially in the future, something collapses or debt and eventually causes we either default or the debt becomes so much that investors just say, okay, this isn't a smart investment anymore, and they just stop buying bonds, or any number of things that could trigger a cascading failure through the financial system, and we could end up collapsing anyway. I really hope that we can come together and rise above it and actually become better for it, but I'm not convinced that will actually happen.
All right. Well, at this point, what I think we should do is thank you for this has gone on about 2 hours, a bit longer than I had anticipated, but I think it was a good show. I found it actually very difficult, and I'm not entirely sure why. Still struggling with that, but Xander, thank you so much. I think this was a good show, so I appreciate it because, as usual, you're a huge contributor to that. So thank you, even though you're obviously a bad person.
Obviously. I mean, I have to be. I am bringing you your shit, so be nice, or I will pee on it or something.
That's true. Well, you're not bringing it to me, but I did. Speaking of, just quickly, just as a sub, I told the story of the woman who had said, "Oh, I'll pray for you," and I said thank you, and I said thank you as a courtesy, nothing else. And she's like, "Oh, you see, I knew now that your daughter's at risk of dying." Now, I knew you'd really believe in God, and I was murderous. I was so pissed. But so Xander and I disagree on guns, not by very much, it turns out, by the slimmest of margins, despite the fact we're both on completely opposite sides of the issue. But it was funny because we were talking about the what's going to happen if the country collapses, and it's just like, well, Nick, you don't have guns, so what are you going to do? I was like, what do you mean? You're going to bail my ass out? It's like, you got 5 of them, dude. Come on over. It's like, oh yeah, sure. Now that the country's collapsing, you're all like, hey, Second Amendment buddy of mine. we haven't talked.
I see what your plan is. You're maintaining your moral superiority and hedging your bets on if the country does collapse. Well, maybe I should make a couple of friends, or at least nominal friends, that I can pay lip service to, that own guns, so that if everything goes sideways in a horrible way, we can be like, hey, we're buddies. Come on.
I am just a touch more clever than I'm given credit for, not by much, but just a touch, and I'm glad you recognize that you are at least a nominal friend. So, yeah, good.
I'm just about nominal in everything.
Just like you'll always be nominal to me, Xander. Thank you.
It's so touching. I'm so glad we could have this heartfelt, touching Kodak or Hallmark moment.
Hallmark. I used
on
to write
the air.
I used to write cards for Hallmark, and that was one of my favorites. You are nominal. Thank you for being nominal. All right. So, well, what I'm going to do is I'd actually like to continue this in the Discord. So I will be in the Discord probably about 5 minutes after the credits are done. I just need to, I'm going to shut down the show. Got a few things I got to take care of, but I will be in the Discord. Anyone who wants to join us, have this discussion? I don't know. Xander, are you going to be able to make it tonight to the Discord?
Yeah, I can be there for a little bit.
All right, cool. So, I'd love
then you can come yell at me and tell me how wrong I am.
Yes. I only do that to sub-nominal friends. You are now up to the nominal level.
I've made it to snide.
It's snide comments and just sort of backhanded compliments.
And how much do I have to make? How much more is the fee level so that I can move from nominal to phenomenal?
Oh, that takes a lot of work. That takes we'll have to. Well, yeah. That's. I'll get you a schedule. We'll get your package out to. Yeah, perfect. All right. So, if you've stuck with us this far,
I hope you finance.
Trust me, you'll need to. You can't afford me. So. If you made it this far, hopefully you like the show. Please like and subscribe. It really helps us out with the algorithm, and that's important. And there are a lot of son of a fucking bitch. Oh dear Lord!
It's the obligatory. Did I miss anything? No, I don't think so.
I don't know. I don't think I'm actually. Am I contractually obligated to read super chats? I don't think. I'm gonna have to read the fine print because I'm not sure that I have to read every single one that comes in. Quite frankly. Jake 4D.
We should set a level.
The $2 super chat. Did I miss anything? It's been 2 hours. Jake. 2. See me wave goodbye, exactly. All right, so we'll be there. Definitely hit the like and subscribe. That helps. If you like the content, if you like what we're saying, please absolutely share the content too. Share it around. Tell all your friends. Tell them how smart I am. If you don't like the content, tell them how horrible 𝐬𝐬𝐼𝐧 is. You can still share all the content. It works out great that way. Any final thoughts, 𝐬𝐬𝐼�?
I guess you can hate on me as much as you want, and just make sure you do it in the comment section below, because no matter how much you hate on me in the comment section below, it still helps the channel. So
that's true.
I'll take it for the team.
Oh, thank you. You're a prince. Oh, God. No, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a whole bunch of love on you going, how the fuck do you put up with Nick is what I want to know. That's what we're going to be. Just throwing you under the bus at every opportunity. All right, folks, I'll be in the...
I would say lots of alcohol, but, I probably shouldn't because I drive a truck.
Yeah.
People might take that seriously and then be like, I need to go check this guy who drives a truck. It says he drinks copious amounts of alcohol to deal with a co-host. Otherwise... May you live in interesting times.
Oh, Jesus. Yes, sir. Okay, yep. All right. Thank you all for watching. Catch you all in a few minutes. Night.